Hello, my random viewers, and welcome to Randomly Offensive. Today, we will be continuing Genetic Blessings in Part 3, Chapter 3, and if you have missed the previous parts or the previous chapters, I will have them linked. The playlist and the individual chapters at the tip top of this video right here, right now. So, with that being said, let's continue with Genetic Blessings, Part 3, Chapter 3. The Chief stands before Al, Vince, and Abraham, now covered in the diamond plating from his newly acquired genetic blessings, while getting prepared to manipulate the air around him to take on this foolish man, Al, who has an unprecedented demeanor about himself and has confidence that a man like him should not have while facing down one of the strongest genetic blessings there is, with the Chief wondering how this had all happened. How is it that his plan had gone so wrong? It was supposed to be Vince who would have the God Orb. It was supposed to be Vince to absorb the God Orb, allowing the Chief to get his hands on it, and Al was never, ever supposed to be the man facing him down, and Jasmine was never supposed to be the threat. She was never supposed to be the one to absorb the God Orb, and not only that, but Alex was never even supposed to be in the equation. Alex was never supposed to be the one to tie this group together, and so the Chief begins to look back at the plan he had created and how it had gone so wrong, so that maybe, just maybe, he can get back on top and fix the mess that Vince and Alex and Al have created. And so it is 10 years ago, 10 years from today, that the Chief was denied the God Orb by Dracula, who is the guardian of the God Orb, and due to his bias towards the Chief will never be able to obtain the one thing he needs to eradicate all genetic blessings, the one thing he needs to cleanse this earth from that evil, has been denied by the only man who hates every molecule about himself, with the Chief still not wanting to give up on his dream, sits in his office watching his GBA unit and examining Jasmine and Vince, who had just become engaged to each other, and examining Jim, Jake, and Paul as an idea begins to dwell within his brain, and this idea begins to grow as he watches his team and realizes that he may have the perfect way, the perfect group to obtain the God Orb so that he can accomplish his goal. And upon the examination of the group, he focuses on one team member at a time, starting with Jim, as Jim has always been a guardian, he's always been a protector, and he, amongst all other genetic blessing agents, amongst all other GBA agents, he is one of the very few who realizes that what they do is many times wrong and morally corrupt, though he does it anyway because he believes it is truly necessary to keep the balance of this planet and keep humanity on top, even though he has voiced time and time again that he truly is sickened by what he is forced to do, and it is one of the hardest things that he has to do. He does it anyway, and the chief begins to wonder if Jim really has a place in this future plan, and wonders if he will have to set up the perfect situation to rid Jim. And then Jake becomes an issue. Jake will never function without Jim, and he too will have to go. And with that being the decision of the chief, he then looks at Jasmine, who has been the perfect soldier, the perfect warrior, and has never said no to the chief, has never doubted the motivations of the GBA, and has always done what needed to be done, has always done what's necessary, and never questioned whether it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, and has always been willing to do the things that would force many people to never be able to look at themselves again. She has always been able to pull the trigger. But then there's Vince Caballero, who has always been somewhat of a family man, and Jasmine has found a moment of peace and tranquility within Vince, and has provided her with the moral questions that the chief cannot allow Jasmine to have. And though the Vince has always come off as callous and cruel, he has never been able to accept any mission that requires him to eradicate a child or anyone of an innocent stance. And so the plan becomes clear to the chief. It's a simple plan, a corrupted plan, a plan that will force the group, the team that he has bonded with, to live on with broken hearts and corrupted souls, and the chances of them ever being able to look at themselves in the mirror is near to none. But this is the only way the chief can think of to finally obtain the God Orb. And so the chief begins putting together his plan that will be dependent on breaking Jasmine and Vince, with the chief knowing that she will never say no and she will never question his motives. The chief has decided that he will break Jasmine, for it is the only way to force the team to be able to do his bidding. And so the chief has decided that he is going to feed Jasmine mission after mission of the innocents being slaughtered, and the only tasks, the only missions, and the only targets she will receive are those of children, innocent fathers, innocent wives, innocent sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers alike. And he will do this for as long as it takes so that he can break Jasmine and put Jasmine at a breaking point. And then the other side, the other piece of the puzzle, the other piece of the plan will be Vince Caballero, as long as he can ensure that Vince will never lose his moral standing and will never lose his attraction to having a family. He can force Vince Caballero to leave the team, and if he can make Vince betray the team and break Jasmine even more, and break Jim, and hopefully kill either Jake or Paul using Vince, then it will create one of the most hostile environments for the team. But then he realizes that he will have to bring Vince back, and that will be the breaking point of Jasmine. Jasmine will have to be so broken that she is willing to throw the life away, that she is willing to side with Vince to eradicate the GBA. And in order for this to be done, the chief must manipulate Vince and force Vince to be convinced that the GBA is an evil incarnate. And once that is all said and done, once that is finished, the team will then begin searching for a way to defeat the GBA. And the chief knows that their solution will be to contain the God Orb, and the chief already knows that Vince and Jasmine will qualify to obtain the God Orb if it means destroying the GBA and destroying the chief. Dracula, the Guardian, will predictively allow them to obtain it. However, that'll give the chief a small window, one of the smallest windows, to snatch the God Orb away from them. For Vince has far too much pride to let Jasmine or anyone else use the God Orb. It will surely be Vince. However, Vince has his weaknesses, and he will hesitate long enough for the chief to obtain it. And so the chief pours himself a celebratory glass of whiskey for coming up with such a brilliant idea, such a brilliant plan. And he begins putting it to action. And so, after the marriage of Vince and Jasmine, the chief has begun his manipulation of the team. And day after day, he sends her only the worst missions he can think of the most innocent children, the most innocent people out there, to consistently break her will and consistently break her loyalty to the GBA. And he does this for years and years on end, and it does not seem to him that Jasmine is breaking an ounce as she consistently comes off strong. But there are small signs that she's beginning to give up. For example, her perfectly organized desk becomes more cluttered, and she begins slowing down on her hygiene and the nice neatness of her room. And so the chief knows that she's beginning to struggle, with her and Vince continuously arguing about the morals of what she is doing, with their relationship beginning to become strained. And Jasmine is truly starting to struggle with the things she is forced to do, as she holds the spear towards a small child. The child begins begging for mercy as the child's parents are laying dead right behind her. Jasmine tries to come up with an excuse, tries to come up with a reason why this is the right thing to do, but she can't. And so she thrusts the spear into the forehead of the child, with Vince watching her do this, Jim, Paul, and Jake too watching the struggle that Jasmine is going through. Vince finally walks up to Jasmine. This is beginning to get out of hand, Jasmine. Are you realizing what you are becoming? Stop, Vince. Not this time, Vince. Please. I can't have you lecturing me, says Jasmine, with Vince staring at her and then staring at the dead child. Jasmine, I don't have a good feeling about this. I do not like seeing what you are forcing yourself to do. You know, you may never have been strong enough to do it, Vince, but I am. And one of us has to be able to do what needs to be done. One of us has to be able to do what is required of us. And if you're not willing to do it, I will. Responds Jasmine, with Vince getting even more angry and walking away, leaving the group behind. And later that night, Jasmine is left alone, staring at herself in the mirror, sitting, not uttering a word, but just staring into the mirror. Something that she will do every night from tonight, which is staring into her reflection, forcing herself to have to look at herself. And the pain becomes real, and day after day, night after night, she kills, murders, and maims, and forces herself to stare into the mirror, forcing herself to look at herself. And one night becomes far too much as she strikes the mirror and screams out in pain. As blood begins to run down the mirror, she sees the reflection of herself, now bloodied, and ironically, poetically, the bloodied mirror shows the most accurate reflection of herself as she stares at her very own self covered in blood. With Vince slamming in the door of the office to the chief, he flips the table of the chief. Do you realize what you are doing to my wife? Do you realize what you are turning Jasmine into? Do you even care about us? Says Vince with anger, with the chief slowly standing up as he fixes his glasses. I'm fully aware, Vince. I am fully aware. I am breaking her. And as a result, I'm breaking the rest of you. Why? Responds Vince. Why would you do that? Why would you try to break us? Why would you try and break Jasmine? Says Vince, with the chief knowing that this is the moment, this is the time to finally split Vince from the team so that he can mold them into exactly what needs to be molded as he walks to Vince, creating a small windstorm within the office, confusing Vince, because I accepted a genetic blessing that will allow me to obtain the God Orb. The God what? What the hell are you talking about, old man? How the hell are you a genetic blessing? I am going to become not only the most powerful man by leading the GBA, but I will also become the most powerful genetic blessing. And I will eradicate the entire race. I will eradicate every single genetic blessing. I must break Jasmine so that she will be able to fight by my side doing so. And I must break the rest of you because you, unlike Jasmine, are not strong enough to accomplish what needs to be done, says the chief, with Vince getting incredibly angry. So, that is your plan? You want to kill every single one? I thought we just needed to kill the ones who were evil. I thought that we just needed to keep the population low so that they wouldn't climb the ranks of power. But now you are telling me that you want to eradicate a whole fucking race? That is what I'm saying, Vince. So, what are you going to do? I'm going to tell the team. The second Jasmine hears this, the second Jim, Paul, and Jake hears this, they will laugh in your face. Do you honestly think that any of them will believe you over me? Do you honestly think that they'll believe that I'm a genetic blessing? Maybe not, says Vince as he now begins rethinking what he was about to do. Maybe not. I will bide my time, though. You will mess up. You will trip up. You will make a mistake somewhere, and the second you do, old man, that is when I will inform the team. Oh, I'm counting on it, Vince. I'm counting on it, says the chief. And so a few more years pass of Jasmine consistently being forced to lose her soul more and more, and Vince being forced to hold in one of the greatest secrets that he has been forced to hold, until the chief had finally given him a mission with the team, a mission that he was not allowed to opt out of, forcing them to take on a group of teenagers, with Vince not being able to, and watching Jasmine kill a teenager. Vince had finally had enough and has been forced to betray his wife, betray Jasmine, the woman he loves. And so he quickly grabs the orb of the now slain teenager and accepted the orb, granting him the genetic blessing of the guardian type that allows him to create force fields, with the team instantly attacking him, with Jasmine broken at what is happening. Vince fights back, and not realizing his own strength, he punches Paul in the chest, with his fist going straight through Paul. Vince drops the dead body of Paul, with the rest of the team speechless and frozen at what Vince had just done. Vince quickly runs away, with Jasmine now losing everything. Losing her husband, losing her friend, and now not having any support from anybody for doing what she feels like she must do. And she spends the rest of the years forcing herself to look herself in the mirror, child after child, innocent after innocent that she slays. She forces herself to look herself in the mirror. With Vince having to live with knowing that he had just killed a close friend of his and had betrayed his family and will never have the chance to build a family with Jasmine, for that ship has sailed, he begins creating his own family, one that he knows will always do what must be done for the world to be happy, as he delves himself fully into the underground, taking advantage of the corrupted genetic blessings and making it clear that they answer to him, they pay him, and they work for him as he rules the underground with an iron fist and uses the money that he collects to start founding orphanages in order to protect those who don't deserve death from the likes of Jasmine, from the likes of the Chief, and from the likes of the GBA as he continues building one of the biggest families anyone has ever built, with many of the orphanages seeing him as a savior and the underground seeing him as the ultimate authoritarian. He then rescues a small child by the name of Alex and raises her as his own child, with the Chief pulling the strings of the GBA, trying to create the perfect situation for him to accomplish his goal as his plan continues working great. However, he never expected Vince to have someone like Alex by his side, and he never expected Jasmine to find another lover to keep herself grounded from her suicidal thoughts and her soul from aching as Al becomes a stronger part of her life. He eventually joins the GBA with the Chief, not thinking much of it at the time and allowing this young man to join their ranks. They begin pulling the strings as more and more genetic blessings become filling the world, and genetic blessings begin increasing at an incredibly fast rate, striking fear into Jasmine, Jim, and Jake, with Alex watching the growth on the computer. "They're everywhere," says Alex. "There's genetic blessings everywhere. They are increasing. Do you think it might be him?" says Alex, with Vince rising from his throne. "I believe it is time to return to the GBA, Alex. I believe it is time to recruit the GBA. Because if it is him, it is time to stop it." And so, just like the Chief had predicted, Vince returns to the GBA, and after facing off all of them, Vince is forced to figure out just exactly what their new roles are after he had left, and where they stand after the Chief has been breaking them for so many years. He faces off against Jasmine. "What roles do you play? Jim is the protector, and Jake is the idiot. But what is your role, Jasmine? You used to be the leader, but you don't seem much of a leader now. What role do you play? What role does Al play? Says Vince, as he is then tackled and struck by Al, who is covered in ice packs, and Vince and Al have a mighty bout, with Vince holding back, wanting to see just exactly what Al is made of and what he is willing to do to protect Jasmine. Vince comes to the conclusion that Al is a far more suited companion for Jasmine than he ever was. And now the Chief waits watching Vince argue again with Jasmine and convince Jasmine that what she has been doing is wrong, as Vince has successfully convinced Jasmine to allow a little girl, a genetic blessing mentalist type, to survive. The chief knows that it is time to finally commence his plan and finally make Jasmine, Jim, Al, and Jake betray the GBA and side with Vince so that they can go find the God Orb. However, he must give Jasmine one more push, one final push, as he hires an assassin, Caroline, to force them to face their greatest fears, showing Jasmine's greatest fear of losing her soul, that she will finally break and leave the GBA behind. And he shows Jim an orphanage and tells Jim that they will blow up this orphanage, killing every single innocent child within it, knowing that Jim will not be able to cross this line, knowing that Jim will inform Jasmine. The chief waits, and he waits at the orphanage, installing fear within the children, as Vince has shown up, angry and furious. They engage in a mighty battle, which the chief wins easily as he explodes the orphanage, seeing Jasmine, Alex, Al, Jim, and Jake horrified at what the chief has just done, with him being forced to kill Jim and Jake. "This is a warning! I suggest you run! Run so we can fight another day!" says the chief as the group runs off. And the chief continues waiting as a $12 billion contract is sent out to eradicate them. It forces them to bond even stronger than the chief had predicted as a team, with somehow this team building a bond, becoming a family. The chief realizes that Al and Alex, who was not a part of the plan, has been affecting Vince and Jasmine. And finally, they had obtained the God Orb, and the Guardian had begun taunting the chief. And so the chief has decided that it is finally time to take the hesitation that he predicted Vince would have and obtain the God Orb. But after facing off Howard, Zorg, Lance, and Abraham, and then Vince, he'd obtain an orb that was not the God Orb. And the chief realizes, due to Vince's bragging, due to Vince's taunting, the chief has realized that Vince has truly changed, for he did the one thing that the chief did not think Vince was capable of doing, which was setting his ego aside and giving the God Orb to Jasmine. And so the chief quickly realizes that his plan is about to become crumbled, all because Vince's heart somehow became softened. Somehow Vince was able to put someone else before himself, and this angers the chief as he realizes that it is Alex and Al who had done this, but maybe, just maybe, he could save this. Just maybe he could make Al force Jasmine not to absorb that God Orb. However, when he tries to persuade Al doesn't even let him speak a full sentence before telling him to put a sock in it, as Al rages and gives him a great speech about how he is truly sick of every single one of them. The chief can only feel anger and fear. For Al will be no issue, but if he kills Al, or even if he kills Alex, who knows what that will cause Jasmine and Vince to do? And so the chief now feels cornered as he stares at Al, who points the blade at the chief, with Alex watching Jasmine, who is staring at the god orb with a tremendous amount of intimacy, for Jasmine finally has a way out of this living hell, and she finally has a way to right all of her wrongs. And so the end is coming to a close as Vince and Abraham stands on the side, about ready to watch a battle between the chief and Al, not knowing what kind of power that the sword of Excalibur is about to present, not knowing what kind of skill Al's about to display, not knowing what kind of power the chief now has as he beholds two genetic blessings within him. And Jasmine is waiting patiently for Al to try and save her and try to defeat this old man so that she does not have to do what everyone else takes as the greatest sacrifice, even though to Jasmine it is not a sacrifice at all, but a cowardly escape, but an escape that she has far, far earned. And so we are where we had left off, with the chief staring down at Al, getting ready to take on this foolish man who thinks he even remotely stands a chance against a man who wields two genetic blessings. The chief covers his body in the diamond plating and swings his hand towards Al, thrusting a massive pocket of air towards him, a pocket of air strong enough to crush any man. However, Al swings the blade of Excalibur and slices through air itself as he slices through the pocket of air, creating an opening, and he points the revolver to the chief and pulls the trigger, with the bullet connecting and clashing against the diamond plating of the chief, with the bullet then exploding into an icy explosion as ice particles cover the chest of the chief. The diamond plating begins to crack and give out, with Abraham scratching his head. Well, that doesn't make any sense. The material of diamond is far stronger than any bullet or ice, says Abraham, with Vince looking at him with a smirk. The material does not matter, Abraham. Regardless of if it's iron, ice, or fabric. A guardian's weakness is the cold, regardless of any material that the guardian might possess. His weakness will always be the cold. And so, true it might be that the chief has added another ability to his arsenal, he has also given himself an additional weakness that can be exploited. I do believe, Abraham, that Al might actually have a plan. with the chief too realizing that he now has to cope with an additional weakness, and knowing that he cannot depend on the diamond plating, for it could cause his demise, he resorts back to using his wind manipulation as Al fires every shot that he has in the chamber of his gun. The chief blocks and catches every single one using pockets of air as he sends them flying back to Al. It is as if the blade of Excalibur is moving on its own at light speed, with Excalibur blocking and slicing every bullet that's being flung back at him. Al then realizes that he does have a genetic blessing on his side, but it's not inside of him. It's inside of the sword that he wields. And so he loads his revolver once again and studies how the chief moves the air around him as he pulls a few more triggers on the gun and watches the bullets be caught in midair, and he begins studying and extracting the movements of the chief's manipulation of air ability, and Al begins to pick up on a pattern as he continues relying on the blade of Excalibur to defend him from the bullets that are being flung back towards him. Abraham recognizes the look of Al. It would appear he is studying Vince. Al is studying the chief. Yeah, he's a lot like you, Abraham. He will study the situation and then react accordingly. Al then becomes on the offensive and charges the chief. So, Al, it very well might seem that I underestimated you, says the chief, still covered in the diamond plating. As he begins swirling air around him, Al fires 2 shots at the chief as he catches both of them with his wind manipulation and spins the bullets around. Al then throws the blade in the air, and knowing exactly what the chief's about to do next, he sidesteps to the left right as the bullet is flung from a pocket of air, and it flies past him as he then rolls along the ground. With the second bullet flying over him, he runs towards the chief, firing one more bullet towards the chief, aiming it for between the eyes. The chief catches a pocket of air, and again, Al predicts where the bullet is about to go. As he quickly sidesteps to the right with the bullet flying past him, he is now toe-to-toe to the chief as the blade of Excalibur falls right into the hands of Al. Al swings the blade, slashing it across the chief, with Excalibur beginning to glow a bright golden aura. It forces the diamond to be sliced and slit. As it forces its way through the diamond plating, it then slices the chief, with the chief stuggling backwards. Al fires another shot that the chief is incapable of catching, and so it connects to the chest of the chief, igniting in an icy explosion, covering his chest once again in ice particles. And before the chief has a chance to react, Al thrusts the blade of Excalibur through the chest of the chief, through the ice, and through the now weakened diamond plating. The blade goes through With the chief being impaled by the blade, he looks at Al. Very impressive, Al. Very impressive. Unfortunately, Dracula specifically said that no stab wound would kill me. No slice, no blade, not even time itself, says the chief, as the chief then raises his hand and forces the diamond plating to take the shape of a blade. He swings it down towards Al. However, when the chief's arm comes down, it clashes against a golden force field that Vince has projected over Al. Will you accept my help now, my dear friend? I understand your anger, and I understand your frustration. But if you are doing this to ensure Jasmine's protection, then don't be selfish and let me help, says Abraham, with Al looking at him. Alright, fine. But don't act like you're doing me a favor, Vince, says Al, with Vince smiling and then looking at Abraham and giving Abraham a wink. Abraham quickly points towards the blade of Excalibur as the Excalibur becomes red hot from the heat being projected by Abraham. With the red hot blade burning the insides of the chief begins to scream. And with the chief falling to his knees, Al points the revolver to his head and begins pulling the trigger, with the chief consistently growing more and more diamond plating around his skull. The bullets keep shattering into eyes and continuously causing the diamond plating to crack and cease, with Vince now in the fray, beating down onto the chief, with the chief's hands now in the air covering himself, with Abraham creating more heat so that the blade of Excalibur continues to burn while still inside of the chest of the chief, while also creating the area and making it hot enough so that the chief cannot use his air manipulation without hurting himself. Almost an exact repeat of their first match. And the chief finally begins angry as he slowly begins standing up and igniting a large gust of wind that storms through and around him, blowing Vince and Al away from him. And due to the heat, the wind creates such a massive hot pocket that it scorches the skin off of the chief and causes the diamond itself to begin to scorch, with the chief now letting up of his diamond plating and letting the air finally let loose. He grabs Excalibur and pulls it out of his chest, throwing it onto the ground with blood pouring out of him, as he then glares at the three of them. I am done playing games, says the chief, as he begins walking towards Jasmine, who stands in the doorway watching the fight, with Al running towards him for a tackle. The chief covers his hand in the diamond plating and backhands Al, sending him flying across the field, with Vince throwing a force-filled ball towards the chief, and it connects to the chief and ignites in an explosion, but the chief doesn't even bother defending against it as he lets it blow up in his face, removing flesh from the side of his face, with only bone and the inside of his mouth showing. He continues walking towards Jasmine, ignoring Vince, Al, and Abraham.
I have had enough, Jasmine. I will not let you absorb that. This ends now,
says the chief, trying to talk with only half of his mouth intact, with Jasmine staring at him and then at the orb, realizing that it is now or never. She looks at the orb as she holds it out. I accept you, says Jasmine, as the orb is then consumed by Jasmine, with Alex, Al, Vince, and Abraham watching their friend, their once beloved leader, Jasmine, fall on her knees in tremendous pain as she screams, with the chief looking at Vince.
What have you done?
And that is Part 3, Chapter 3 of Genetic Blessings, and I will be continuing it in Part 3, Chapter 4. If you have listened for this long, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. Do consider hitting the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed, and do not get hit by a meteor. Take care of yourselves, and bye.